stepmom to kids that were 13 and 7. A few years later, I became a biological mom. A few years after that, I found myself a single mom and survived that role. Today, I'm happy to tell you that my husband Rick and I have been married for more than 10 years, and we have 3 beautiful boys. Each of our kids has needed advocacy for different reasons, different struggles in their lives over time, and they needed varying degrees of that. But without a doubt, our youngest son, Levi, has needed the most advocacy. And I'm going to share more of his story in just a little bit, but he'll be 8 years old in a couple of weeks and has already undergone 8 brain surgeries. So, what is an advocate? Let's look at the definition. It says an advocate, according to dictionary.com, is a person who speaks or writes in support of a person, or a person who pleads for or in behalf of another. How many of us have found ourselves speaking or pleading in our role as a mom? Right on. If Mother's Day for you is lacking that warm, fuzzy feeling, that satisfaction, or that acceptance as your role as a mom, then I want to encourage you today. My message is that there's not only hope, but peace available to you right in the midst of your struggle. And that as an advocate for your family, you're laying the foundation for that same hope and peace to be there for your kids. So as an advocate for our families, we need to figure out, or actually we experience all kinds of struggles. And right now we're going to watch a video together, and we're going to watch one family's tremendous struggle.
How you doing?
What's your name?
Emmanuel.
Emmanuel. So who's here with you today?
My mum, my cousin, my auntie, and my brother.
How old are you?
Well, actually, I'm not exactly sure. When I was originally found in Iraq, in an orphanage, my mum found me. I was born with no birth certificate, no passport, nothing. My story is that I was born in the middle of a war zone. My brother and I, we were found by the nuns in a box in a park, in a shoebox. They brought me to the orphanage. We'd hear shots, noises that we didn't understand. It was like looking at an angel when Mum, Moira Kelly, walked through the orphanage door. She brought us both to Australia for surgery originally. And then sort of Mum fell in love with both of us. My hero would have to be my mother. She worked very, very hard, extremely hard, to change my life hugely. You know, some people will say I was a man without an identity, but with my mother and with my brother, I believe that I can do this, you know.
Wow, good on you.
Wow, I can only imagine some of the struggles that mom had to advocate through. I'm sure there were health issues, behavior issues, educational issues, probably judgmental comments, and perhaps even the struggle of single parenting. And I know when we're in the midst of struggles, it's easy to look at people and situations as the source of our struggle. But as an advocate for our families, we have to correctly identify the source of that struggle. And in fact, the Bible defines it clearly in Ephesians 6, chapter 6, verse 12, rather. It says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." You see, there is a bigger battle that's going on. Once we've identified the source of the struggle, then we have to equip ourselves. We need to get prepared. So as an advocate for our families, we're going to find that equipping. Physically, we're going to need to just get the proper rest and nutrition in our bodies so that physically we can do what we need to do, right? And then we need to perhaps educate ourselves. I imagine this mom learned a lot of things that she didn't know before she began raising these 2 kids. So we need to educate ourselves or seek the help of others who are educated about what we're struggling through at that moment. In fact, I'm going to share a personal story right now about a time when I had to do just that. I mentioned earlier, our youngest son, Levi, has had 8 brain surgeries. Now, I'll just tell you quickly, the first 7 surgeries were because he was born with a condition called hydrocephalus. He has extra fluid in his brain, and then has a shunt in his head that is a life-saving device that lets the fluid work its way away from the brain. But it's a man-made device, and it has failed, so he has had to have that repaired several times. But it's his 8th brain surgery that I want to speak a little more about today. See, at 22 months of age, Levi began having seizures, and for 3 years, he suffered from intractable seizures. Intractable meaning there were no medicines. Every medicine that he qualified for didn't work. Nothing would stop them. Countless hours in the doctor's offices, ambulance trips, hospitalizations, our lives were dictated for 3 years. The drop of a hat, a seizure would come, and we would be seeking help. Locally, the doctors said, there's nothing more we can do. We've done all that we can. Further testing, again here, they said this is just it, the end of the road. And then I watched our son have a 70-minute grand mal seizure. And I knew I had to equip myself. I had to go seek people who knew more. I needed a second opinion. So my husband and I did just that. We took our son to the Cleveland Clinic and scouted out people who knew more than I did about what was going on. So the Cleveland Clinic kept him for several days, and they evaluated him, and they came back to me and they said, yes, we think we can help you. But what it's going to involve is removing half of his brain. I've got some pictures I want to share with you right now. This is Levi just before his surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. He was just 5 years old. He had the surgery in June of 2009 that did disconnect the entire left hemisphere of his brain. It's called a functional hemispherectomy, and his was on the left side. And then I wanted to share with you the rest of the story. This next picture shows Levi just 2 days ago out riding his bike, and you saw him in the video earlier talking about he just loves everything about Mom. He's a happy kid. And I love everything about him too. I'm happy to report 3 years later, Levi has not had one seizure since the day of his surgery. You see, that was a struggle that I had to go into and be equipped. I had to put on the full armor of God because, you see, I knew there was nothing I could do to change that situation. I had to rely fully on God, and I had to equip myself. And so I scanned the Bible and I searched His Word. In Ephesians 6:10 and 11, I found this. It says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. There are days when I just don't feel like physically, emotionally, spiritually, I've got enough strength to get it all done. But it was never intended to be that way. God asks us to be strong in His power. And then we've got to pray. You see, when we pray, we acknowledge that God is the one in control. And when we pray, it gives us an opportunity to pour out our hearts and plead for our children. And prayer demonstrates that we want God's input. We want to know what His will is, not only in our lives, but in the lives of our kids. Earnestly invite God in to your life and invite God into your child's life every time you pray, and watch the outcome. Because prayer opens the door for so many blessings. And as an advocate for our families, we need to recognize those blessings. You see, when we start looking at those, our focus comes off the negative and starts shifting to the positive. And we see that God has been present in our situation the whole time. And that brings more hope. And then we stop taking things for granted, right? And we become more thankful. And when you have a thankful heart and a hopeful mind, peace comes in abundance. I'd like for you to embrace your role as an advocate for your family, okay? And be filled with joy, even through your struggles. So today you've learned that the difference a mom makes is that she cares for her family, she is a warrior for her family, and she advocates for her family. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Shirley.
The last thing that we want to share with you this morning is a true story of a good friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, and someone who I think is just a wonderful, wonderful mom. But she didn't start out with a life that would lead you to think that she would become a wonderful mom. So listen very carefully as I read her story. She's not able to share the story herself this morning, but I have her permission to share her story. For many generations of my family, motherhood was passed down as a generational plight. My mother and her 5 siblings were left by their mother when my mom was an infant. The same was true about my grandmother and her mother. Never looking back long enough to change direction, they walked away from their children and began new lives. The feelings that I experienced as a child of abandonment were often unbearable. Not understanding the level of brokenness in my mother, I often internalized her absence as my fault. Somehow I didn't do enough, or maybe I did something that made her go away. These are the thoughts that bombarded my mind as early as the age of 4. I remember missing her so much that leaving with her when she came for us was worth the pain that we knew would come when she left again. Not until I was 13 and hospitalized for swallowing a pin did things change in the way that I saw motherhood. It was Thanksgiving, and all I could eat was clear liquids so that travel of the pink pin could be monitored. 4 days I lay there wondering, where could she be? Where was my mother? Nothing that I imagined seemed to bring me enough peace to make any excuses for her absence. I knew with all my heart, and really she determined in her heart, that no child of mine would ever feel the way I felt in that moment. Through the years, it has been difficult to do what was never shown to me. But God has given me the strength to change.